The University of Texas and University of Oklahoma are seeking greener pastures with the SEC. At this point, it's not really a question of if, it's more a question of when. How did we get here, and where does college football go from here? I've seen this question tossed around from every perspective possible except for the one that actually matters: money. Everyone seems to have a passive understanding that this is what's driving the decision, but no one seems to understand exactly how or why, or especially what is at stake. So, let's follow the money. I owe you a few prefaces before we get started. Number 1, media contracts are notoriously secretive. In the book, To Pixar and Beyond, Lawrence Levy discusses in depth the challenges that he and Steve Jobs faced when trying to fairly price reasonable expectations into a contract for Pixar's continued work with Disney. They didn't really know where to start because Disney wouldn't reveal any of the details of their other contracts, and other entertainment conglomerates saw Pixar for what they were: competitors, and thus refused to divulge any of their own profit splits or expense reports. All of that is to say, To Pixar and Beyond is a great read that I would highly recommend, but also, finding figures to support a proper analysis of this question is extremely difficult. Contracts for collegiate sports media are presented as big tickets, be it either the annual revenues and expense report we'll reference later on, or the sum total of a TV contract to a given conference for a set period of time. Is this an exact science? No, not exactly, but I did the best with what I had. The second preface I need to make is that there are plenty of other valid arguments to make as to why this move does and does not make sense. I'm not here to answer or offer any of those. I just know humans, and I know that money speaks louder than tradition, principle, handshakes, and yes, voidable contracts. In order to properly analyze where we are, it's important for us to know where we have been. The year is 2012. The Big 12 is on the ropes. This conference is a barely legal adult born in 1994 as a phoenix rising from the ashes of the now fallen Big 8, with a hodgepodge of Southwest Conference teams sprinkled in. What were once threats and flirtations with one team or another leaving the Big 12 has resulted in the departure of Texas A&M, Nebraska, Colorado, and Mizzou. While there was lots of finger-pointing and name-calling leading up to a less than amicable divorce, the release of the Longhorn Network is the straw that undoubtedly broke the camel's back, leading to the departure of the College Station Colt. Texas A&M. Who's to blame really just depends on who you ask. The Texas athletic director at the time said that A&M used the creation of the Longhorn Network, a network similar to the Yankees' Yes Network that we'll cover more on in just a bit, to flee in the face of what was once an uncertain financial future. In a Texas A&M TED Talk, yes, that is a thing that actually exists, then A&M President R. Bowen Lofton would instead argue that Texas disrespected A&M and that an SEC partnership would allow for nationwide exposure, which also conveniently results in more money. Regardless of fault, A&M splits. What was once a powerhouse of college sports is on life support until the landing of a monumental 13-year, $2.6 billion media agreement for the rights to air Big 12 sports with ESPN and Fox Sports Southwest. That same year, the Big 12 picks up TCU and West Virginia as the Big 12-2 is revived for another decade of interconference play. 2 years later, the college football playoff commences, and at the time, it's seen as a massive step forward. After the last 7 years, though, of some variation of Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and Oklahoma, sports fans tire of watching Saban's defense run a train over Lincoln Riley's offensive juggernaut year after year after year. As a fan of the Big 12, one of my life's greatest regrets is being a fan of the Big 12 because, and let's be honest, the SEC, at least today, is just better. I would have liked to have seen TCU or Baylor's offense match up against Bama in 2014, but that was the same year the Big 12 itself lacked the intestinal fortitude to claim a true champion, thus missing the boat entirely. Let's fast forward to present day. The Longhorns and the Sooners have seemingly been working for the last 6 months to facilitate an exit strategy from the Big 12 in order to find a seat at the table with the SEC. In my research, the single biggest catalyst I see driving college athletics is TV deals. This is where the money is made. Sure, Texas racked in $44 million in ticket revenue for 2019. That is not an insignificant portion of their $200+ million pie in annual revenue for the Texas athletic program. But after learning way more than I ever wanted to know about collegiate athletic program finances, I really don't think that ticket sales are a serious concern when guiding a program. The Texas faithful are still going to come and watch their horns in the hopes of being able to tell their kids, "I was there when we were back." Sports ticket sales are really quite simplistic when you compare it to any other business model in the free market. Let's take Texas Memorial Stadium. There are 100,112 potential seats available for purchase. Of course, Texas wants to maximize these assets for themselves, so we'll start the bidding at $1,000 per ticket. Also, of course, there aren't 100,112 Matthew McConaughey's who can afford that, but maybe there's 2,000 who are. So let's gift them with the best seats in the house in exchange for the highest premium on these specific tickets. Now let's go down the line and ask the same question for a $900 ticket, or an $800 ticket, and so on until we've successfully leveraged every asset we have, that is, seats available for butts to occupy, while maximizing our return on investment, thus filling the stadium to the maximum capacity for maximum profit. Ticket sales aren't responsible for the switch that we see today with Texas and OU trying to leave the Big 12. The entire NCAA ecosystem revolves around TV deals. This is Bob Bowlesby. He's the current Big 12 commissioner, and his job depends on convincing the remaining 8 teams, minus Texas and OU, to stick it out and poach other teams to join their crew of fearless banditos. In his last media day, he aptly mentioned that the last time media negotiations happened, they were entirely contingent upon cable deals to reach cable-wielding households, and that today, the landscape has changed. As everyone, including Big 12 Commissioner Bob Bowlesby, knows, cable is out and streaming and digital is in. While that's true, that still hasn't stopped mega TV deals from continuing to be made. Do you remember that big money deal that the Big 12 signed back in 2012? The one that saved the conference for the next decade? Let's compare that to the most recent figures available today, including the current updated figures for the Big 12. At the conclusion of the 2019 to 2020 college football season, one that was unaffected by masks or pandemicking, this is what we know. The Big 12 made $439 million, with $38 to $42 million being distributed to each team, with the commissioner collecting $2.5 million. The ACC just made a splash with ESPN's creation of the ACC network. In 2019 to 2020, they made $455 million, dishing out $27 to $34 million per team, with Commissioner John Swofford making $3.8 million. The Pac-12 made $530.4 million, with $32.2 million given to each team, with $5.4 million awarded to Commissioner Larry Scott. Of note, the Pac-12 network gives its schools a smaller percentage of earnings because they as in the Pac-12, own the Pac-12 network. Thus, they cover the expenses of content creation. Oh, and apparently a lot of it goes to the commissioner, who's the highest paid in college sports among the Power 5 conferences. The SEC, yes, that same SEC, the mecca that has so enticed these two powerhouse programs away from the Big 12, made $720.6 million, with $45.3 million going to each team, with the exception of Mississippi, who was banned from postseason play. If the SEC made that same amount with 2 additional teams, they could still pay out more to each school with 16 teams than the Big 12 currently pays 10 teams. That is assuming 0 increase in revenue that the addition of the Sooners and Longhorns would bring to the SEC, and 0 lost revenue that the Big 12 sustains while losing Texas and OU, both assumptions that are entirely false. The Big Ten as a conference is actually the biggest moneymaker on TV deals. Last year, they made $781.5 million, with $55.6 million going to each team. Each team in the conference does so well for themselves because of a combination of out-earning every other conference in TV deals and also having fewer mouths to feed. My assumption is that Texas and OU have had calls with the Big Ten and been denied for that very reason. It also helps when you apparently trademark the word "the" and collect royalties every time it's said in any other broadcast. I'm looking at you, Ohio State. So what's the big deal here? The Big 12 is quite literally in the middle of the pack when it comes to earnings, and given Texas and OU's prestige, the Big 12 can and should prioritize higher payouts to these specific programs, as both schools could miss the SEC payouts by a mere $3 million by sticking with the Big 12. Certainly that can't be worth a $70 million payout to escape the Big 12 before their contract is up, right? Well, here's where the plot thickens. The data presented was from a football season that ended right before the pandemic. The last payout widens the gap. Big 12 schools, for the second year in a row, received less money than expected. What's more important is what happened last May, as the Big 12 picked up the phone and made 2 phone calls, one to ESPN and one to Fox Southwest. The hope was to start renewing their contract ahead of time and to make a splash like they had a decade before when at the time the Big 12 reclaimed economic relevance. But the problem was no one returned their call, and when they did, they were unwilling to negotiate. Texas Tech President Lawrence Chovanec states, "Our partners, ESPN and Fox, are not interested in acting preemptively with regard to our contract. They recognize the importance of our partnership, but there's just too much uncertainty." This sounds to me like a combination of ESPN and Fox saying, "Hey, it's not you, it's me," and Chovanec saying, "This is fine, everything is fine." Valuations are so often rooted in the potential for future earnings. Tesla does not make a significant amount of profit on each of its vehicles, but their stock has skyrocketed because of their potential to earn in the future. As a distraught fan of the Big 12, I can't exactly blame Texas or OU for walking out because the writing seems to be on the wall. Your revenue has decreased 2 years in a row while everyone else's has gone up. But more importantly, if your media partners were serious about that air quotes with my fingers important partnership you claim to have, they would make a move now to get ahead of other competitors in conference deals, similar to how the Cowboys should have paid Dak like 2 years ago but dragged their feet and cost themselves more. If I'm Oklahoma or Texas, to heck with this sinking ship, I'm out. The single biggest monkey wrench I see in merging Oklahoma and Texas into the SEC like some sort of college football Voltron is the remaining deal on the Longhorn Network. This network actually provides more revenue to the University of Texas than the SEC does to any of its teams during the course of a season. It really threw me for a loop when trying to figure out why Texas wants to do what it seems it's wanting to do. But here's a few things to consider. The University of Texas is the single biggest money-generating machine in college sports. The last estimate available online has Bevo weighing in at an annual $223,879,781, an asinine amount of money that previously allowed those same revenue generators nothing more than a scholarship and a cafeteria punch pass. Now, I'm sure a large part of that revenue undoubtedly does come from the Longhorn Network, but revenue isn't profit. Texas maintains a self-sustained football program that at the time of this publication provided $19,644,884 in profit after expenses were paid for. While I have no doubt that plenty of these expenses went to lining the pockets of boosters, the president, and Tom Herman's severance package, that's still a very significant amount of expenses to continue to allow the machine to run. The second biggest money-making machine in college sports is actually Texas's neighbors to the east in, wouldn't you know it, College Station, Texas. By USA Today's last estimation, Texas A&M accumulated a measly $212,748,002. That said, Texas A&M gets the last laugh. When it comes to profit, the Aggies are clocking a current pace of $43,735,546, or more than double what Texas is scoring year after year. It is my assumption that a lot of this loss in revenue is tied into the very hands-on approach the Longhorns take to running and maintaining the, Longhorn Network. If the Longhorn Network is the only casualty in addition to a $70 million buyout, I'm sure there will be no emotionally charged season finale or farewell broadcast before putting it on the shelf. From what I've gathered, the SEC is very anti-other media outlets than the one that they own, but this same Longhorn Network is owned by ESPN, which has also clawed its way to and past CBS to a lion's share of the SEC for themselves, and of course, it's Disney who owns ESPN, and toppling Fox Sports will bring them one step closer to world domination. A total monopoly over entertainment and media. I'm sure there's a way that the SEC could make an exception for the Longhorn Network if the mouse makes an offer that can't be refused. So there you have it. Like I said, I did my best to get this whole thing figured out. There's no shortage of conflicting numbers and reports, but this was my best read on it. I'll link in the description the 2 articles who left the most breadcrumbs if you care to read up about it yourself, but really I made this video so you wouldn't have to. Because I'm petty, I would just like to point out the irony of Texas A&M continuing to sing their same fight song for the last decade. This thing has about 25 verses, and 13 of them are dedicated to the University of Texas, a team they haven't played since 2011. Sure, A&M trails Texas by 41 wins overall, but doggone it, every Aggie who ever lived has threatened to saw your horns off. In spite of my loyalties to the Big 12, I have no illusions about the fact that this train wreck has left the tracks. Here are some viable programs with big enough feet to replace the cleats left by the departure of Texas and Oklahoma: Notre Dame, Ohio State, Alabama, and USC. And that's about it. Here's the programs the Big 12 is considering replacing Oklahoma and Texas with: BYU, Boise State, Cincinnati, Memphis, and UCF. Look, I love the idea of sending a wild card into the playoff every year, but none of these programs can carry what the Longhorns or Sooners are going to leave behind. Without another mega deal for the Big 12, the next 10 years are going to be more painful as the last 10 years, as recruiting classes continue to be outdone one after another after another. I got one recruitment letter in my athletic career. It was the swim coach from D3 powerhouse Kings Point asking if I wanted to try out for the swim team. It was from email address donot reply@usmma.edu. I didn't. I have no idea what goes through a recruit's head before joining one program or another, but we've already seen the SEC start to monopolize the talent pool. With Texas and Oklahoma about to join the party, get ready for more reruns of SEC championship games all throughout the college football playoffs. Whoop-de-friggin-do. Thanks for stopping by. I hope this was informative for you. Like I said, if this is something that really resonated with you, something that was helpful, let me know and I can start making more videos like this. Either way, thanks for joining, and we'll see you in the next one.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.